Hello and welcome, fellow bibliophiles. This video I will be reviewing The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. This copy has an amazing cover. I had originally picked this book out to read for week 3 of New Worlds November. Yes, this video is coming out in January, but you know what? This is not my main channel, and I've mentioned that before on the channel, so I'm just doing as much makeup as possible. I'm really glad I picked this book up. I have already read and reviewed The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, and I will go ahead and link that video up above if you guys are interested in watching that. And the reason I say I'm really glad that I read this is because I feel like I've gotten more of a sense for H.G. Wells as a person and also as a writer. One of the things that I've noticed, this being my second book from him, is that he, I believe, wrote the way he spoke. He has a very strong voice, and I have noticed both in The Time Machine and also in The War of the Worlds that he writes not necessarily writing this grand adventure or like this story. He writes like he is telling a tale to a friend, like over a cup of ale or a glass of wine. It feels very much like you are in his study and he is just, you guys are just hanging out, despite the fact that it is using Victorian language. And I feel like that's both a positive because it definitely sucks you in, and a negative if you do not get the references that he is making in his books. Because of the fact that this was written, I believe, in 1898, he does make a lot of references to things that, especially in the previous book I read, which is The Time Machine, to, while they are classic pieces, maybe is not something consumed currently by the general public that would be reading this. Also, if you are not familiar with the UK, or Great Britain and its topography and or its locales, at the beginning of the book it is a little bit harder. He does do some descriptors, but as I said, he definitely writes the way he speaks. So if you are not familiar with Kensington, if you are not familiar with the areas that he is discussing and how the train system works or where everything is located, he just assumes that you know where those things are. So it does make it a little bit difficult. You know, I am an American. Thankfully, I have lived in London for a time, so I did have a frame of reference for this book, but not everyone will. One of the things that I very much enjoyed from this book is the description of the Martians. I have a very distinct picture of what the Martians look like. I tried to find in like DeviantArt and doing Google image searches one that was close to it, but none of the artist renditions I found of the Martians matched my mental picture of what they were, but he did very well in describing them. I think the thing that I have an issue with when I look at artist renditions of the Martians that he describes in this book is that they're all standing too tall. And mostly because of the fact that H.G. Wells does mention in this book that the gravity is so much heavier or denser here on Earth versus in Mars, because Mars is further away, that they had difficulty moving around. So them standing tall and proud just does not work for me mentally. That is not even a criticism of the book. That's just something that seems to be forgotten when artists depict the Martians. But H.G. Wells, I believe, captured the human experience of what it would be like if there was a Martian invasion, especially during the Victorian era, which is, you know, when this was written. It feels very real, both the narrator's reaction to what is going on in the world and also feeling so lucky that he has managed to survive multiple encounters with the Martians. And then also the individuals that he meets along the way and their varying reactions to what's going on, their varying motivations, their varying desires and wants. It just feels like he was able to capture the human experience from different points of view very well in this book. And it has sat with me. I had to read this over multiple short reads. It did only take me 3 hours total to read the book, but it was like multiple short reads. And I kept thinking about it after reading it, like what I had just read, because it had such an impact. I also noticed that towards the end of the book, there was kind of a reference in one of the characters' ideology of how humanity could beat back the Martians, kind of a reference to the time machine and how that society had been set up, which I thought was like just a little clever nod from H.G. Wells to a previous work of his. And this does very much make me want to read more from him, because I did really like the conversational style of his writing. I do like that type of storytelling where it is just that. Feels like someone is telling you a story, but in a more intimate and personal way instead of just writing a grand yarn. Not to say that I don't enjoy that, but I do really like this, and I like the vocabulary that he uses. It's not used much anymore in modern fiction. I also like the phraseology. I do love reading a lot of Victorian and Edwardian era books, like the classic books. Like I love the Bronte sisters. You know, I love Jane Austen. I love that style of writing just because it feels so grand, that style of writing and that type of language used. So I really enjoyed, considering I've read a lot of female classical authors, to finally read a male author. I've really enjoyed that. And I do feel like, you know, even now in the 21st century, like this still feels believable. I did keep coming back to the thought, I was like, I wonder how he would have written this 20 years later with the invention of airplanes. Like, how much would this story have changed? We're never going to know the answer to that. But that was like the only thing that kind of was like, what if there were airplanes? But there weren't airplanes when this was written, so he was talking about balloons and stuff, and it just made me realize, it did take me out of it a little bit to just think of the technological changes that have happened over the last, you know, century and a quarter, from the time this book was written to now. And the fact that I still found so much enjoyment from this book, and it still felt believable to me this long after being written, is, I feel like, a really testament to his writing style. And also the way he was able to create this story. And it was exceptional, and I really liked it, and I think you should read it. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Again, I will link in the cards the time machine if you haven't watched that, and I will hopefully see you much sooner than it took me to make this video. Also, for New Worlds November, I will link everybody down below that was participating in that. Hopefully they won't mind me shouting their channel out 2 months later, because that's how long it took me. I still have one more book to read for New Worlds November, by the way, so I guess look forward to that. Hopefully not 2 months from now. Bye! Bye.